The challenge is to get a lobster boat close enough to the ledge so you can see the birds, and that's where Dave Hiltz is just supreme. He's just excellent and not worried about wrecking his boat.
Well, that's valuable to have.
Yes.
This is Bob Duchesne's Wild Maine. Today's show is all about canaries in the coal mine. I'll explain that in a few minutes, but basically, if you see critters suddenly disappearing, you may be next. I'll be spending the next hour with 3 wildlife biologists from the Maine Department of Inland Fisheries and Wildlife. One is studying the collapse of great blue heron nesting colonies along our coast. One is studying why half of the world's population of a tiny bird called the purple sandpiper has suddenly disappeared. And one is using birds to signal when things are actually getting better. Bob Duchesne's Wild Maine is brought to you by Hammond Lumber, Napa Auto Parts, and EBS. Danielle Doria is the scientist studying the decline of great blue herons. She was on the show a couple of summers ago when we went to check out a heron colony in Deblois. When we got there, the herons were gone, and there was a great horned owl nest right in the middle of where the herons had been, along with a mama owl and several babies. Lindsay Tudor is the shorebird specialist for IFW. We've actually been in a couple of surveys together from Lubec all the way down to Thomaston. Well, Danielle Doria and Lindsay Tudor, welcome to Bob Duchesne's Wild Maine.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
You're bird specialists, and what else do you do with the department? Because I've only known you from the projects that we've worked on. Lindsay, we worked on shorebirds together. Danielle, I've done great blue heron surveys with you before. Do you do anything else?
Sure we do. I know, I'll speak for myself first, but I mostly deal with wetland non-game birds, so other species that I focus on are common loons and secretive marsh birds, black terns, things like that. But both of us are involved a lot in environmental review, where we look at projects and try to minimize impacts, and just give advice on stuff like that. We just finished up our big planning process, the State Wildlife Action Plan.
Yes.
What else do we do, Lindsay?
Well, then for our species that we're involved with, surveying and monitoring and any research needs to help us manage the species better. So, and I deal primarily with shorebirds. I throw in least tern and harlequin ducks, just to keep me honest.
Do you get to do harlequin ducks?
Yeah, I won't give that up. I should give that to our waterfowl biologists, but where it is a non-game species,
that's right.
it's kind of under my purview, but I just don't want to give them up.
No, I would not give them up. I would fight to keep them.
Okay, the reason we're really talking today is because there are birds that are declining, and I always consider that to be the canary in the coal mine. In the old days, when they used to send miners down, they would bring a bird cage down. The bird died. It was a signal that there was poisonous gas leaking into the mine. Well, we've got canaries in the coal mine all over the planet right now, species that are declining rapidly, and some of those are happening right here. And I know that you've been specializing in these. Danielle, we've talked before and done the Great Blue Heron survey, but they are declining.
They're declining. Yeah, at least what we know is that they've been declining in their coastal breeding range within the state. So, statewide, we're still trying to figure out if there is a trend up or down, or if it's stable statewide, the population. But we definitely know that our coastal colonies have declined pretty drastically since the 1980s, and so trying to figure out, is that statewide, and what might have caused that, and is it continuing to go on? Is there anything we can or want to do about that?
And purple sandpipers. If I say that, most people aren't going to know what I'm talking about.
I know. Well, I was out yesterday with an individual that grew up in Southwest Harbor. He'd never heard of them, never noticed them.
Really?
Yet they're out there.
Yeah, if you go right down to Seawall and Manset, right at high tide, you look over the edge there opposite the hotel, they're going to be sitting right there. It's my favorite spot to find them.
But it is getting more challenging to find purple sandpipers. And I don't know if you want me to talk about the life history.
What is a purple sandpiper?
A purple sandpiper is a shorebird, and that's a taxonomic group that includes all plovers and sandpipers. This particular species nests in the Arctic. We have 3 nesting species, one in the lower Hudson Bay, one in the high Canadian Arctic, and one in Iceland. And these 3 different nesting populations are all different sizes. So we know all 3 of these populations winter off our coastline. And this bird winters on offshore ledges and islands, and they inhabit the rockweed and the red seaweed, and they're feeding on the invertebrates in the algae.
I think it's probably noteworthy that this is about as far north as a bird can be.
Yes, they are the most northern wintering shorebird of all 30 shorebird species.
Yeah.
When they come to Maine, they think they've flown south. You know? So
yeah, it's really funny. People think that our birds go south in the winter, failing to realize that we are actually the South for a lot of birds. There's a lot of birds that come down here. And the purple sandpipers in particular, when you say sandpiper, most of the birds people would be familiar with are the ones that are running along a beach.
correct.
Because that's what most sandpipers do. There's a bunch that might be out in fields and that sort of thing, but we'll ignore them. But these guys are really rock specialists. They don't get on the sand very much.
No, they're tough little guys. You know, think of them today. What is it? I woke up, it was 0 degrees, high winds, and they're out there on these bare ledges just surviving.
Yeah, just trying to stay ahead of the splash.
Yeah, and they get splashed.
They do.
But they are uniquely adapted. You know, their feathers are extra long. They're short and squat. And their digestive tract is longer than other sandpipers. So they're adapted to these cold temps, but they are a tough little bird.
They're a tough little bird, and yet they're declining, which...
Yeah, so that's very concerning. Back in 2000, during our state planning process, is when we first determined that we knew nothing about purples wintering in Maine. We knew we had them, but we had no idea on abundance or distribution. So in 2004, you're going to figure out how old I am here.
but I'm going to keep it to myself.
We started to look at abundance and distribution. We started out putting telemetry on purples to determine how much area they use when they're wintering here. And we found their very high site fidelity. Once they come into Maine and they settle down, they're only moving 3 to 5 miles. You know, so they stay put, and that makes it easy to survey. So once we knew that, we started coast-wide boat surveys. And we started in 2002 and went up to 2007, focusing on a particular bay system each winter. And we estimated at the end of it a total of, well, we counted over 13,000 purple sandpipers. With a detection put in there, a detection rate, because we do miss them. They are so cryptic.
Yeah, I was going to cover that.
Yeah, if you have just 1 or 2 birds, they're easy to miss. So we determined a detection rate. And so our final estimate, we figured, was between 14,000 and 17,000 birds we were wintering at that time. The Western Atlantic population was estimated to be 15,000. So we knew that estimate was low, but we also, it told us from our work that we have a high responsibility for this species. We are wintering at least over half of the Western Atlantic population on our shoreline. So we continue to work with the Canadians, and Acadia University and Environment Canada wanted to do a DNA study to make that link between wintering areas and the breeding areas. So during that process, we went out to collect blood, and we couldn't find purples.
Really?
We would go to all the traditional areas that would have huge flocks. We thought, we'll get out there, we'll get our samples. We went in Addison, we did Penobscot Bay, and we did Casco Bay. And that was alarming. At that point, it's like, we've got to determine what's going on with these birds. So right now, this will be our 3rd year of a long-term monitoring plan. So in 2014 and 2015, we selected 160 areas in the Penobscot Bay, Blue Hill Bay, and Frenchman Bay. Sorry. In that area, we're surveying 160 sites. It takes 4 boat days. And in both years, our numbers, when compared to the same sites in 2004, our numbers are currently down 49%. And that's in 10 years.
And that is the shocking number that inspired today's show. A couple of weeks ago, I wrote about purple sandpipers in my outdoors column in the Bangor Daily News, and I explained how it was a favorite of mine. Lindsay Tudor emailed me and told me just how much they had declined. Meanwhile, great blue herons are also disappearing along the coast, Danielle Doria is the IFW expert. So Bob Duchesne's Wild Maine continues with both those biologists in a moment on Sports Radio 92.9, The Ticket. Welcome back to Bob Duchesne's Wild Maine on Sports Radio 92.9, The Ticket. Disappearing birds. A little one called a purple sandpiper, and a big one called a great blue heron. The purple sandpipers are cute, tame, and really tough. Lindsay Tudor is the shorebird expert at the Maine Department of Inland Fisheries and Wildlife, and we'll get back to her in a moment. Danielle Doria is IFW's heron expert. So, Danielle, do we have any concrete idea yet why they're disappearing from Maine?
With the herons, we're not really sure what might be causing the coastal decline. I mean, there's a couple things that we automatically think of. You know, the recovery of the bald eagle population comes to mind, and there's so many more nesting pairs along our coast using the same islands that herons once used before. We've definitely had lots of reports of kind of predation or harassment of eagles, of herons by eagles. And they can cause a lot of disruption to a colony. But, you know, why are eagles maybe going after a heron even to begin with? That could be a bigger question as far as what about their main food resource?
Yeah, because going after a heron would be a lot of work.
It's a lot of work. There's not a lot of meat on a heron, actually. They're really light, you know, mostly feathers and bones, so not an ideal prey item, really.
Yeah, they'd prefer fish,
right,
for the most part, or something dead already.
Right. So that's, you know, one question is there a food resource issue going on along our coast? You know, fisheries, looking at the fisheries resources, and then other fish eaters, how are they interacting and everything. So I think it's a really complex problem that we just haven't even started to figure out some of the pieces yet. But we definitely have seen a decline. I mean, from the 80s to 2009, we had, about a 47% decline. And then from the 80s to now, it's almost like a 75% decline. And that's just on our coastal colonies. However, when we start looking at our statewide information that we've gained from our Heron Observation Network and volunteers providing some data, the population, at least over the last 7 years, seems somewhat stable when you look at it as the whole state. There's some issues with some of that data because it's not, you know, sampled statistically, but a pretty good feeling that maybe statewide we're doing okay, and maybe they're just shifting from coastal inland, avoiding eagles that way, or other issues. So
Okay.
Certainly both of you can relate to this, I'm sure, but the Gulf of Maine is a changing place right now, and we're seeing some serious challenges. I mean, it's not on everybody's radar screen, but every year it seems like there's some kind of a failure going on. On a particularly warm summer, the fish population changes out there, and tern colonies can either, mostly crash these days. So we're seeing a lot of that happening. The shorebird numbers have just plummeted. I mean, we're not just talking the purple sandpipers, but all species of sandpipers really are showing sharp declines that use our shoreline in this fall. So something's going on in the Gulf of Maine. It is supposedly the fastest warming body on Earth right now. And we're going to keep our lobsters for a while longer maybe, but maybe not forever. Things are not looking that great. So how much of that in your studies relates to what's happening in the Gulf itself?
It is a dismal picture. With shorebirds, it's not just climate change in Maine, but of course changes happening in the Arctic. And we know the last 2 nesting seasons for all shorebirds up there has been very poor. So you couple that with stressors and threats on staging areas or wintering areas, and for like the purples, they're not staging in between. They're going from their nesting areas directly to the Gulf of Maine. So if we're having an issue with their food base during winter, that could impact winter survival. If you couple that with poor nesting success, definitely it could be the problem. And so then our next step is to look at what's happening with their food base in the Gulf of Maine. And I'll be starting a study. We're pursuing funding as I speak. But hopefully I'll be working with Brian Olson and Amanda Clemmer from University of Maine. And we're going to start looking at the invertebrate prey base of these purple sandpipers.
Well, as you say, they are tough little birds, but they are declining. So doing a survey, a great blue heron's enormous. They can't be that hard to find. You can even find them by plane. So how do you actually find all these locations?
So we're primarily looking for the colonies where they're nesting, and they nest in trees, and those could be dead, dying, or live trees. So things like live pines. Those are the hardest sites to find, even from an airplane. But one of our best tools is to use an airplane, a little Cessna, and fly over areas that we think are potential habitat or historic sites, and monitor sites that we already know about. But then once we find a location by air, we'll often go on the ground and monitor from a distance so that we're not disturbing them. And that's what most of the volunteers are doing.
On the other hand, the sandpipers, most people could walk right by them and never see them.
I know. So when we do our boat surveys, we have 4 observers, and we all have binoculars. The challenge is to get a lobster boat close enough to the ledge so you can see the birds, and that's where Dave Hiltz is just supreme. He's just excellent and not worried about wrecking his boat.
Well, that's valuable to have.
Yes. And so between 4 observers, we'll find birds, but I'm sure we miss them.
Yeah.
And it's just very slowly circling ledges and islands.
If you need help, I'm really good at spotting them.
Well, I'll put you on our list. We have a large list of interested volunteers.
Do you?
But they never come back a second time.
Really? Oh, I love getting offshore in winter.
Birds move, and as we talked about, they can be impacted either on their breeding grounds or on their wintering grounds. Can you really tell where the bird is suffering these impacts such that it's declining? Or is it a mystery to start with? You know they're declining. It may be in the breeding grounds and maybe down here. You can't know which was responsible.
Right. So for our winter surveys this year, we're actually expanding our survey area east, hoping that maybe there was a habitat shift and these mid-coast birds maybe moved east. So we're going to do some surveys between Schoodic Point and Addison, hopefully over to Jonesport. And then another year I'd like to go back to Casco Bay, and that's the only way I can tell is to resurvey areas that we had surveyed in the past. So
these guys can winter anywhere from here up to Newfoundland.
Right, and then the Canadians, of course, their challenge is to survey Newfoundland.
Yeah.
And they are trying to do that, and we're all hoping that there are large numbers up in Newfoundland.
Now, how about herons? Because herons leave the state mostly in winter, and where do they go?
Well, we actually don't know where our great blue herons, Maine's great blue herons, go to winter. So an exciting thing that we're going to do this year is put some transmitters on some birds, satellite transmitters, and these transmitters will last several years, so we can get multiple years of information on their migration tracks and then also where they're wintering. And then maybe we can start devising some other questions, like, so depending on where they are wintering, are they wintering in different areas, or are they all going to a similar spot, and kind of look at things going on there as well.
Yeah, as I talk about the declining health of water bodies, Chesapeake Bay has not done well over the last few decades.
And that could be one of the prime areas that our birds go, because they need to go south to where there's ice-free waters, and that's, one of the prime spots to start with. So.
My guests are Danielle Doria and Lindsay Tudor. They are the Maine Department of Inland Fisheries and Wildlife biologists. We're trying to figure out why great blue herons and purple sandpipers are disappearing, why things are going wrong. Still to come, another IFW biologist, Aaron Call, will join me, and we'll learn how birds can signal when something is going right in the environment. Up next, what can you do about all this? It's actually kind of fun. This is Bob Duchesne's Wild Maine on Sports Radio 92.9 The Ticket. This is Bob Duchesne's Wild Maine on Sports Radio 92.9 The Ticket. Saturday mornings at 9, Sunday mornings at 8. This morning's show is about disappearing birds, 2 in particular, purple sandpipers and great blue herons. Danielle Doria at Inland Fisheries and Wildlife is studying the herons, and Lindsay Tudor is the IFW biologist studying the sandpipers. And you can help. Volunteer citizen scientists can actually help study nature and have a good time doing it. So the question is, how?
Well, Star, I don't have as good great a network as Danielle has, but we do take volunteers to survey beaches for the other shorebirds from July to September. I currently have 4 volunteers, but we have a lot of beach.
Yes, we do.
So,
are you in charge of piping plovers, or?
I administrate. I'm the administrator there. I'm in charge of getting funding and working with the municipalities who do a lot for the plovers. And we do have municipal volunteer coordinators for the piping plovers. So definitely give me a call if you're interested in doing beaches.
So let me get this straight. People can volunteer to go on a beach in July.
Yeah.
Gee, that sounds like, when you compare that to going into the mosquito-infested woods.
Well, that's the problem with the purple sandpipers. I don't get a lot of volunteers to go out in winter and walk along the shoreline. But I have 2 volunteer interns right now doing Acadia National Park through the park system. So I do take volunteers, but I'm not as organized as Danielle.
Okay, how would somebody get in touch with you in order to volunteer?
Yeah, my office is in Bangor, and my phone number is 941-4479.
And that's Lindsay Tudor. Lindsay with an A, if I recall correctly.
That's correct.
Lindsay Tudor. And she's in charge of finding purple sandpipers. If you need tips on how to find them, just call me.
There we go.
Now, the heron network, on the other hand, is a really well-developed system because you've got a lot of volunteers doing this, and my wife is one of them.
Right.
And she's deadly. If she takes over monitoring a colony, it will go away.
Yeah, unfortunately, Sandy's colonies have not persisted over time. I keep trying to find her a new one to monitor. But yeah, so the Heron Observation Network is a group of volunteers that basically adopt colonies, which means they go out during the nesting season, which can be anywhere between May and July. And at least once they go out and observe the nesting birds. They tell us how many active nests, how many inactive nests. And if they want to go repeated visits, like every 2 weeks or so, they can also track individual nests and say how many young they're seeing and how many survive to the end. And this has provided a lot of the information over the last 7 years about our herons in Maine. And currently we have probably around 100 active volunteers that have been monitoring colonies, and then they're probably monitoring well over 100 colonies because some of them have multiple colonies.
Yeah. And that one's not hard duty either. You just basically walk up, take a look.
Yeah, I mean, it depends. Every site is unique. So some sites, there are not nice trails that go to the wetlands. Some sites we get lucky. There's an old logging road that goes right by the wetland or something like that. So it's not that hard. But it's always a challenge to find the right colony in the right location for the right person, and vice versa. Somebody might be interested in Portland, but we don't know of any colonies right in Portland. So finding the appropriate site and one that's accessible based on somebody's abilities too. But primarily you just need binoculars and some bug spray, potentially, depending on if you're in a highly infested area. But other opportunities besides our normal colony monitoring, this year we're actually starting this transmitter project where we're going to tag 5 adults. And part of that is really trying to connect students of all ages, really, with this project through the first step will be finding herons that are foraging. And then once we find some in key areas, then we're going to bait them. And so finding volunteers to help us with the baiting process.
How do you bait a heron?
So
stake out a frog? What?
This is something that our partner, John Berzored from Lenore-Rhine University in North Carolina, he's going to be coming up and helping us with the trapping and tagging of the birds. But he's perfected a method where they actually put out like a cement mixing tub that's perforated and that's stocked with live bait, which we will be working with our fisheries biologists, of course, since this is live bait. But you put that out in one of their habitual foraging areas. So not only are they coming to that area to feed, but here's like extra food that they can go after. And so you do that for several days, and then when you're ready to trap them, you put an array of traps, which are modified leg hold traps in the wetland, so that they'll hopefully step on one of those as they're going towards that bin. And then you're sitting and waiting and watching this all happen. So once they get caught, you run out there and net.
And they have a bill like a stiletto.
Yeah, so you got to be careful of that. And wearing goggles is usually recommended, even helmets. And also, as soon as you can get a hold of that bill, the better. And just hold on to it so that you have control.
Yeah, a purple sandpiper's not going to hurt you, but the heron...
They're friendly.
They are.
Those are friendly.
Do you just talk them into giving themselves up, or how do you catch a purple sandpiper?
We use net guns.
Yeah, okay.
We can, as you say, they're so tame, so you can use a skiff and get very close within 15 feet, and we'll shoot them with a net. We'd rather they just line up and jump in the boat, but they're not that cooperative yet.
Not yet. So, Danielle, we didn't really cover how people get in touch with you and join the network.
Sure. So my number, very similar to Lindsay's, is 941-4478. And just give me a call, or, we can also provide emails and everything. But we also I have a blog on our Maine Department of Inland Fisheries of Wildlife webpage, and that's the Maine Heron or Heron Observation Network, the Maine blog. So there's contact information on there too.
Yeah, and the fact is, people probably aren't going to remember the phone numbers from this radio show. Might not even remember your names.
Right, just Google it.
But they can call IFNW.
Yes, definitely.
Say what they're looking for, and they'll connect you. Okay.
Oh, could I add? I'd like to thank our funders
go
for
right
all
ahead.
this work.
Believe me, we suck up to sponsors on this show.
Okay. Well, it's so important because these are non-game species, so we really depend on the chickadee checkoff, state wildlife grant monies, Maine Outdoor Heritage Fund. Who am I forgetting, Danielle?
Our birder band program, the Maine birder band. The loon license plates are also another one. And all these sources, not only are they a source of funding, but they actually are a source of match for federal funding. So, $5 of this type of money from Outdoor Heritage Fund or Chickadee Checkoff can actually leverage another $15, so it's really $20. So it really goes a long way.
I think when people think of inland fisheries and wildlife, they're thinking of the game species and don't realize just how much work the department does on the other critters that make Maine a special place to start with. But also, as we talked about canary in the coal mine, we didn't realize acid rain was getting to be such a big problem until the frogs started disappearing.
Exactly.
So,
the environment is such that the little ones suffer first, but we're next in line if we don't figure some stuff out.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah, it is concerning.
Yeah, and again, you see that in the Gulf of Maine. Things are changing out there. Fisheries have declined to the point where they don't exist anymore in some cases. Things are going on we have to stay in touch with, and sometimes it's the small non-game critters that are tipping us off to a problem. So, again, I appreciate you being on the show.
Well, thank you.
Thank you very much.
That's Danielle Doria and Lindsay Tudor, two wildlife biologists at the Maine Department of Inland Fisheries and Wildlife, who are studying birds to determine what's going wrong in our environment. Up next, another IFW biologist who studies birds to see when things are going right. Aaron Call joins me next when we return on Bob Duchesne's Wild Maine. It's Sports Radio 92.9, The Ticket. This is Sports Radio 92.9 The Ticket with Bob Duchesne's Wild Maine. I'm once again in the conference room at the Maine Department of Inland Fisheries and Wildlife. About 8 years ago, I sat in a living room along the riverbank in Milford discussing the details of a brand new project that would study the effects of river restoration. The idea was simple enough. Volunteers would survey certain sections of river above and below dams, counting certain birds, and we monitored those birds to see what changed when certain dams came out. I volunteered to take on the Stillwater River. Erin Call was a grad student at the University of Maine at the time, but now she is Dr. Erin Call, and she's a wildlife biologist at Inland Fisheries and Wildlife. She still runs the project, which is now vastly expanded. So, welcome to Bob Duchesne's Wild Maine, Erin.
Thank you.
We just spent a half an hour talking about using birds to tip us off when something is going wrong in the environment. But you can also use birds to tip you off when something's going right, and that's what you're doing.
Exactly.
It's the Penobscot River, well, it's not just Penobscot River, it's a Maine River project you've got going now.
Yes. It includes the Penobscot and 9 other Maine rivers.
Now, I assume there are some big ones. You're probably doing, Kennebec?
Yes, yep. It includes the whole list here: Penobscot, Androscoggin, Kennebec, Sebasticook, Machias, Presumpscot, Royal, Saco, St. George, and Union. And I'm hoping to expand as well, maybe to other rivers, or to improve our monitoring within those current rivers to get more sites on the rivers. We did a very good job covering the Penobscot because of the focus there on river restoration and the convenient location to the University of Maine, where it was initiated through the University of Maine as part of my doctoral project with Mac Hunter. So that made it possible as well to really get a number of sites on the Penobscot as well as other rivers throughout the state.
Now, you're a wildlife biologist with IF&W now, but you started this when you were in grad school.
Yes, it was initiated in the fall of 2008, little pilot project that fall, and then I started my doctorate in the spring of 2009 and expanded the sites and monitoring. And I've been very fortunate to continue the research, monitoring, and other objectives as part of my current position with IF&W, specifically because of the importance of a lot of these things to raptors such as bald eagle and osprey. So it really ties in well.
Well, it's important to be able to measure this over a significant period of time so you can watch trends.
Exactly.
So if this had been a grad student project and then ended at the end of that, we wouldn't know nearly what we do now.
Exactly. So we have that continuity with the department involvement, and then I've continued to stay in touch with the university, and the plan is eventually to get another graduate student to follow up with sort of more intense monitoring to do a pre and post restoration comparison. But we need to have many years in between because it may take many years for the river to respond to restoration because of the complexity of all the fishes, the sea run fishes, and their life histories, what they need to grow and reproduce. So that's where we are at with everything.
Oddly, though, when the Edwards Dam came out on the Kennebec River in Augusta, I think people were surprised at how fast the river started to rebound.
Yes, exactly. And that's what they found in other systems as well, is that there is a very striking initial response. And so we're capturing that with our monitoring right now. And then maybe once we're quite confident for all of these species of fish that they've had a chance to respond, and thus the entire system of all the creatures that feed on them, like the birds, that we can really get a good holistic picture of what's going on.
Birds make it convenient because you can't always tell what's happening below the surface, but you can watch the predators and figure out where it is they're fishing.
Exactly.
So that's the whole point of this.
Yeah, so really to do a good job monitoring change within nature, you need good indicators. And these suite or group of bird species, we call them river birds, are very valuable indicators because they are easy to observe, and the results are kind of a nice way to convey to the public what we're seeing. And they're very responsive to changes as well because they're eating not only fish, but they're relying on a lot of other pieces to the river, so you get a good picture.
Now, when the Penobscot River Dam started coming out, that was really a great opportunity to study a before and after. And you got me involved in this. I did my own survey plots for a couple of years, just so we got a sense of what the species population and distribution were around these dams that were going to be affected. And then we can measure later, after the dams are removed, what changed.
Yes.
So that's essentially what you've done.
Yeah, it's a perfect system. And so those other other rivers serve a twofold purpose. So points and observations on other rivers besides the Penobscot, one, serve as a comparison. So if we see changes on the Penobscot associated with restoration, is that just a change that we're seeing across the whole state, a broader cause of that change, or is that specific to the restoration on the Penobscot? So that's one purpose of the other sites.
It's like having a control group.
Exactly. It's a control group. And then a second purpose, just completely independent of river restoration, is just beginning to understand how all these different factors or habitats affect the birds we see. So yes, the presence of dams could be one. Water flow, water depth, what we have around the river. Is it urban? Is it farmland, forest? And we can collect all these variation and sort of diversity of components of the river and compare it to the birds that we're seeing. So it's really valuable. All these sites serve a purpose, and all the data is very valuable.
So how does it work? What's the protocol?
Yeah, so the protocol, what I did, I tried to only recruit volunteers that were very comfortable and experienced birders, such as yourself. So that I would show them a list of bird species that we're working with and that they would feel very comfortable in identifying them. So those are pretty much the big key features.
And they're not rare birds. These are...
No, very common birds. On the list we have, bald eagle, even generalists such as crows and gulls, all waterfowl, ducks, herons. So any bird species that would rely on the river at some point in its life. So it's not necessarily completely reliant, because we also include birds such as tree swallows, because they're foraging on insects that emerge out of the water.
Dr. Erin Call is a biologist at the Maine Department of Inland Fisheries and Wildlife. For 8 years, she's been leading a project to study birds on Maine rivers to see what they can tell us about the effects of river restoration on wildlife. And since we've now been doing this for 8 years, I'm wondering if we've learned anything yet. I'll ask after Bob Duchesne's Wild Maine returns on Sports Radio 92.9, The Ticket. Welcome back to Bob Duchesne's Wild Maine on Sports Radio 92.9, The Ticket. We're talking about appearing and disappearing birds today. That's one nice thing about birds as a clue to what's going on in the environment. You can't easily see what's going on with the food chain underwater, but you can see the birds that are feeding on it. Erin Call is an inland fisheries and wildlife biologist who is leading the Maine River Project, a long-term effort to study the effects of river restoration. So have we learned anything yet, Erin?
Yes. So I did successfully defend my dissertation after a little bit of a delay after being hired with IFNW. So I defended in the spring of last year. And one of the things that we sort of learned is how some of these features that I talked about, presence of a dam or a wetland or water flow, related to individual bird species abundance. So, for example, we learned that if a dam was present, or if a dam was not present, you would have more osprey and bald eagles, a higher abundance of those species. Above a dam, you would have a lower abundance of osprey and bald eagles. So I kind of ran through all of these different variables and how it related to specific bird species. And then I wasn't able at that point to talk about the effect of river restoration on these bird species because we have yet to collect those data. Another piece of my thesis and one research component was looking at how important these nutrients that are coming from sea-run fishes, how important are those in the diet of a few river bird species like bald eagle, osprey, belted kingfisher, and tree swallow? Is there any sort of change in the importance of these nutrients this is just on the Penobscot River, so does it change lower in the river to upper sections of the river above these dams? And what we found was that, for instance, bald eagle was consuming these nutrients below the VZ Dam, which is the lowermost dam on the Penobscot River, but those nutrients weren't showing up in the diet above the VZ Dam. So this was really interesting because presumably eagles could fly down and travel and obtain these nutrients and supply it to their young, but that the VZ Dam was really acting as a hard barrier to the transfer of these valuable nutrients to young eaglets. So that was really fascinating, and it will be very fascinating to repeat that now that the dams have been removed, and to see if those nutrients are now becoming more evident in eaglets farther up the river.
Well, for all of this, you're going to need a lot of help.
Yes.
You've got a pretty good network already, but I'm sure you can already use more volunteers because, like, I dropped off your list.
Yes, you did.
I've got no time.
Yes, so I have written a blog on the IFNW website. You could find it there, kind of summarizing what I've been talking about, and then it has specific details on contact information and surveyor needs. But essentially, we have both the riverbird surveys, which I talked about, which were initiated in 2008 and encompass this large group of riverbird species. So there are a few sites that we're hoping to get people involved with. But as I mentioned before, we'd love to get more sites within our current 10 study rivers to sort of balance that sample size out. So that's one need for the riverbird surveys. And then another component to the riverbird project is we call them river herring, river raptor surveys.
Really?
Yeah. So river raptors is just more specifically just bald eagle and osprey. And observing these birds at river herring spawning sites where these herring are concentrating. So we have some sites on the Sebasticook River, but there are other sites throughout the state. And these surveys, unlike the others that are conducted year-round, these are just during about May and June. And the surveys are conducted a couple times a week because it is a shorter time frame. So I've been recruiting a few people as well to start at new river herring sites. But we'd love to get people involved on the Sebasticook River as well. This year we have the Sebasticook Regional Land Trust, Jennifer Irving, helping out with those surveys on the Sebasticook River. But that's another piece that we'd love to get more people involved, more citizen scientists.
So if somebody gets roped into this, basically what they're going to have to do is go sit on a river and watch for 20 minutes.
Yes, yeah. And for actually now, the riverbird surveys we shortened to 15 minutes.
Oh, good.
Yep.
Because I never had much use for that last 5 minutes.
Yes, exactly. So that was one chapter of my dissertation to see if we could collect the same quality of information with a slightly shorter survey period. So those are 15 minutes. And the river herring, river raptor surveys are 9 minutes, so they're even shorter. Because a lot of times at these sites we have so many birds, we want to get more of a honed-in snapshot so we're not double counting birds as they're flying in and out of the survey site. So it's a little shorter duration for those
Certainly,
surveys.
if you live near one of these rivers, it would not take much time out of your week. The river survey, I think you were doing only once every other week or so.
Yes, and now that's another piece. So now it's a 15-minute survey every 3 weeks. And then we skip certain time periods where we don't expect the bird assemblage to change that much, the group of birds that we're seeing. So we skip July, August, and December, I think.
So it's not really a big time commitment, especially if you only do one site. If you feel ambitious, you could do 4 or 5 sites. But
Yes, yeah, we do have a couple of volunteers that have quite a few sites, which is wonderful. And I think they really enjoy it. And I have about 9 or 10 on the Penobscot that I'm trying to keep up with. It would be wonderful to get someone to help me out with those. So any local people, local birders, it would be great to talk to them.
Well, how do they get in touch with you?
They can contact me via email at erynn.call@maine, maine.gov, or give me a call on my...
They can always just call up IFNW and say, please forward this message.
Okay, yes, that's a good idea.
That's a short, easy way to do it.
Yep, but email is probably best.
Yeah, I'm sure they can find you on the website, maine.gov/IFW.
Yes, yep. So if they just email, I get it. The webmaster often forwards me raptor-related questions from the public, so I get those often and could respond that way as well. I guess there is one thing that we haven't touched on. I was successful in applying for and receiving a Maine Outdoor Heritage Fund grant to support the development of a Maine Riverbird website. And I'm hoping with this website to better share our goals, accomplishments, and also serve as a tool to recruit more citizen scientists. I'm hoping that it will provide a way for people to be able to go on the site and look at, as a map or maybe a report, the data that we've collected. And also provide ways for citizen scientists to enter their data and review their data.
That'd be convenient.
Yes, it would be very convenient.
For all of us.
Yes, so we were very grateful for the Outdoor Heritage Fund, and then we did have also Pittman Robertson funds, federal funds, as part of that. And the overall goal, even beyond the Riverbird Project, is to use this as a template for a Maine Department of Inland Fisheries and Wildlife citizen science website that would have all these projects under one umbrella, with this as a starting point, the Riverbird Project.
So if folks ever wonder where their chickadee checkoff money or their loon license plate went, here it is.
Yes, we definitely are very thankful for all the sources of funding, and it is extremely valuable to the work that we do.
Well, great, and good luck on the upcoming season, and thanks for joining me on Bob Duchesne's Wild Maine.
Thank you.
Erin Call has been my last guest, the third of 3 inland fisheries and wildlife biologists that also included Lindsay Tudor and Danielle Doria. To volunteer for Little Citizen Science, you can get more information on the website maine.gov/IFW. And to review, remember, this show and all previous shows are archived at the web at 929theticket.com. Bob Duchesne's Wild Maine returns next Saturday morning at 9 and Sunday morning at 8. It's brought to you by Hammond Lumber, Napa Auto Parts, and EBS on Sports Radio 929 The Ticket.